Welcome to Empowered Returns, a show that surfaces forward-thinking real estate advice that investors and developers need to help them invest smarter and build better.
Welcome to another episode of Empowered Returns, and I'm here with PT Weinberg, as always. How are you, PT?
Doing well, Mike. How are you?
Awesome. And we're here with Pat Callahan, President of Callahan Construction. We're really excited and fired up to talk with you, Pat, about all things construction and how we're building, especially multifamily, but all the different construction you're into. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So maybe you just want to jump in to dive right in and talk a little about Callahan. Obviously, as a family business, you've been around for quite a while, but why don't you give us a little bit of the background on who Callahan is, what type of work you guys do?
Yeah, it's a family business. It's been around for about 68 years. We're one of the larger open shop GCs in the Northeast. Our backlog last year was around $600 million. And, I'd say we're a diverse company. We do a lot of multifamily, senior housing, affordable housing, life science, corporate office, retail, hospitality. So we've got a diverse customer base and a diverse product type, as well as we're diverse in construction type. So, I think one thing that we do a little bit differently is we emphasize on pre-construction services. A lot of our GCs are kind of, more of a commodity, low bid type general contractor. We shy away from that, and we focus on providing value through pre-con services and so forth.
Nice. Maybe let's dive into that for a little bit. How do you, when you first come across either a project or a potential client, how do you like to engage with them in terms of pre-construction services and how you're expressing your value in terms of where you can really deliver and make an impact on the project overall?
Yeah, I think for Callahan, we call it enhanced pre-con services. We have a lot of internal staff between architects, engineers, logistics, MEP, QC, and so forth that really kind of enhance the pre-con. So you're almost getting a peer review of what's being designed. So I think, we try to get in with our customers as early as possible because if the plans progress too long, they're too far ahead, into more of a DD level or whatever it might be, it's too hard to go back in a lot of cases to take out some of the costs that might have been missed or could have come out, you know what I mean? So we encourage them to start early with a lot of the groups we work with where we've done a lot of deals together. We're in there almost the same time, or if not before the design team, providing information, what that site might cost, things like that, so they can make a business decision. I
can only imagine the level of value you guys are oftentimes able to add. I mean, just seeing the projects that we're working on and sort of, we talk about this with a lot of clients. So just assembling the whole team as early as possible usually makes everything go so much smoother because everyone has their own input and their own advice and their own expertise that they can bring to the table and help, de-risk a project, to reduce costs, to help build a better product. In the end of the day, for us, it's mostly multifamily and condo residential side. So, helping design something that hits the market. But from your perspective as well, is just like really managing an effective build process, build timeline, and cost structure. I can imagine. I'm sure there's other things too.
I mean, we have some customers that bring us on from day one. We've got others that bring us on at the end of DD or early CD, and most of the equity players, most of the larger national players, I should say, they bring us on really early because they know the value that is brought through that early stages. And I think some of the groups that are bringing us on so late, they feel like they're getting more of a competitive pricing from the GC, which is maybe a point or two in regards to fee at the most. But you pick up so many points on the early pre-con between value, between a better way to build, taking the costs out of the site, whether it be cut and fill, utilities, earth support, ground improvements, the building, taking a well thought out schedule and logistics and shaving time off, which saves GC. So you're missing all that upfront work that can take place that will save you hundreds of thousands, if not millions, and you're worried about
$50,000
a couple of points on fee structure.
Yeah.
Then they think, oh, well, if I do it too early, I don't know if my number's going to be right. But any GC can take their number down at whatever level of plans to make their pricing look sexy. And then it all comes back in when you get to GMP. So there's no magic to that. The magic is where you save all the money up front and try to figure out, build a better mousetrap.
I mean, we talk about it all the time, like getting in early, getting the right team, being prepared. And then to your point, it's like stuff kind of costs what it costs, right? And it's all about the planning to eliminate unnecessary costs. And that's what gets missed if you don't do that early. And what percentage of the clients that you're working with, or that you see kind of on a macro level in the marketplace are bringing in, whether it's you guys or, other people, or bringing their general contractors in early DD and schematic versus, to your point, sort of waiting till they're getting on the precipice of CDs and then bidding it out, just trying to, save that, that nominal amount of money when it's really about the big picture?
I would say it's 50-50. I would say 50% of them bring us on before DD, and that's where you're getting your value. And, the other 50 comes on at all different other stages. It could be at the end of through DD, the end of DD, or even into early CD. And the other thing is, is the fear that they're paying money for pre-con services. I mean, Callahan carries the pre-con services to GMP. And there's a value put there in case there's some type of separation, right, at the end of the day. But that, again, that half a point or 1 point of pre-con services gets far outweighed by what you save through good pre-con.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, I think there's this myth that is like, okay, I have to bring a contractor construction set so that they can give me accurate, real pricing and they can really fine tune their numbers. But I think, to your point, that's such a myth when you can get in, in the entitlement phase and before design, even, well before design development through the early design phases. And you can add that kind of sort of eye and vision of how this project's going to go, how the schedule is going to lay out, how we can, build a better plan to deliver way more value than it's going to cost someone to invest in those early phases in a construction sort of expertise like you guys bring to the table.
I think debt and equity likes it too. At the end of the day, if they know you've got a well thought out plan with a solid GC and a solid design team, I think they look at it as there's lower risk, right? At the end of the day, versus coming in at a bid scenario when you're at the CD, they haven't dove in like you would have, doing months and months of pre-con,
Yeah. I mean, I think just like you guys, we have clientele and developer clientele that sort of ranges from all sorts of experience levels. So from the very, maybe the very first project all the way to you guys, to us and to you guys working on people who are big national institutional developers who have been through the experience. And I think you're right. Like, the people who have been through it before sort of have a better recognition that bringing on expertise early actually, although there's a cost there, it saves you money and delivers a better return at the end of the day. 100%. So that's the one thing that we constantly are trying to tell sort of new and upcoming and, less experienced developers, hey, like assemble that team early. So it's good advice.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, obviously so much of what we're talking about, right, the word cost has probably already come up like multiple times, right? Like, people just right now, especially the past few years and through COVID, right? It's a construction cost, and then clearly when you're talking about all these projects, right, the biggest numbers, the construction. Yeah. So talk a little bit about kind of the climate of the industry right now in Greater Boston, and kind of what are you seeing as far as subs, materials, and there's been so much chatter for an extended period of time about construction costs. Like, where is the market currently?
Yeah, I would say, from pre-COVID to the height, you saw costs, some materials, up 50%, 30%, then you look at the overall where some things didn't move. I would say from the beginning of COVID to the height of COVID, or the height of the market, they were up 15, 20%. I mean, it's a big number, and that's the entire scope of the work. Right. It's starting to work its way down. I mean, all the signs are there. We're getting much more sub coverage as we're getting to a GMP now. In the height of the market, you get 120 bids or whatever it might be. We'll be getting 200, 250 bids now. So you're seeing there's more participation, more sub participation and material to participation in regards to bid. We're starting to see the numbers move a little bit. And if I made it to make a guess, I would say by the end of this year, we're not seeing it yet, but I think it's coming, where subs are going to start, unless something changes, right? The subs are going to see that they're just burning way too much off. I would think you'd probably be 5% or so off of where we are today. So say January 1st of 23 to January 1st of 24, I would think those numbers would come down about 5%. And again, unless something changes, but I always look at it this way: we had our best year ever in 23, and we're going to be off 25% volume-wise in 22 is our best year ever, and 23 will be off about 25% volume-wise, but it will still be our second best year ever in sales, right, without picking up another job. Wow. So, don't get me wrong, if we don't pick anything up in 23 at all, 24 will be a lot lighter. And I think, other GCs have that same scenario, right? And the subs would have that exact same scenario. So they're burning it off, quicker than they're putting it on, but it's not at panic mode yet. And I think that panic mode starts to come to the tail end of the year. Same thing, there's not a lot of work going on, that they need to fill the machine and feed the machine, and they'll start to, drop those numbers. You start to see commodities come down more. You'll start to see how a sub looks at it come down more. And you might even start to see some labor move at that point.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of people have been through it on like these micro levels, whether they've done renovations or small, and then there's guys who are doing smaller developments. And as as one of the, as you said, one of the largest kind of open shop contractors, in the region, right? Like, what does your typical sub-stable look like, right? Like, how many real options do you have for all the big trades on, a 100-unit job or a 150-unit job? Like, what does that landscape look like?
I mean, a lot of our jobs end up being a mixed bag with union and open shop subcontractors. And it depends on the product type. Wood frame resi is a different sub base than life science, right? At the end of the day. So between those different groups, if you were to take 100% open shop sub base, I would say there's probably 150 solid key subs that you would feel comfortable with working with all day. And that's
Per trade?
No, total.
Okay, all right.
Now, then you have probably another 50 or so. I mean, we've got thousands of subs,
Right,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe another 50 to a couple hundred of the smaller ones that can fit in there, that you don't have to have this big, huge sub to do that scope of the work, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you mix in the union subs, it even makes it that much stronger. 80% of the workforce is open shop.
Right.
It's only 20% in this market that's union. So your biggest sub base is on the open shop side. A lot of people think it's the opposite.
Right.
And then I'd say on the resi, you have, I would say the ratios are the same on the different product type.
Okay.
It gets a little thinner on hospitality. A lot of those are subs that are across the country and so forth that come in for certain tasks and so forth.
Yeah.
But I would say, we the one thing about the Northeast, there's a strong sub base in the Northeast.
Yeah.
And speaking of sort of open shop or union discussion, you guys have already maintained status as an open shop business, and is that principally for the flexibility you can bring to jobs in both directions and or the larger sub base, or what's the kind of the impetus or the strategy there?
I mean, I would say most of our jobs are a mixed bag, so we do utilize a lot of union subcontractors on our projects, but our philosophy to that is bring the ones in that bring value, right? And we work a lot with the building trades. A union GC that's signatory with the carpenters has to bring in all the carpentry trades, but he most likely is doing a mixed bag with all the building trades. So my mixed bag is just a little bit different than their mixed bag, you know what I mean, at the end of the day. But our philosophy to it is we work for the developer. We don't work for the carpenters union. We don't have a signatory status that I need to do what that organization tells me what to do. I work for the developer, and he's the one that's hiring me and paying me. And I will advise him what we think makes sense for the area, the type of product type, and what unions would make sense for a particular opportunity. And we try to massage those relationships with typically the building trades to try to bring them on as part of the project. But, and I would say, again, 90% of the jobs out there is a mixed bag of union and open shop, but everybody knows they need to work in harmony.
Yeah.
And frankly, you could have a 100% union project that gets picketed. It's a labor dispute or whatever it might be. So there's no perfect answer. But we just do it a little bit different, and we're more in the suburbs where it ends up being more of a mixed bag and not an all union job.
Yeah. And what is the the proportions of your jobs? You mentioned the everything from life science to hospitality to residential. What kind of is the breakdown in your business?
So in 22, it was 40% life science, 40% multifamily. And the other 20 was made up of some retail. Retail has softened. It's coming back a little bit, but it's softened. The hospitality market dropped off once COVID hit. Yeah, it was 40-40-20, and other oddity. We do a lot of TI and everything too, so it fell in that 20%. Right now I see 23 probably being more including affordable. We're doing a lot of affordable. It's got a little bit of a recession-proof with tax credits and everything.
Of course.
So I would suspect our multifamily will probably go up a little bit to maybe 60, and the other 40 will be a little more life science and the other thing and the other product type. But I life sciences, we enjoy being in that market. It's a solid market. We see that coming back. You know what I mean?
Do you see it coming? So obviously there's a boom times for a while, but sort of has faded a little bit in
no doubt
in status.
I think it's got to. You look at this environment in this region, you would think it's going to. I don't have a crystal ball like a lot of these developers and see it
They all
better
think
than
they
I
do.
see it. Yeah.
Sorry, guys and girls.
But the people we talk to anyway that are developers that they feel that it's going to come back. Right? At the end of the day.
Cool. And I think you guys had a conversation earlier that was talking about how you focus even on the residential side more on the apartment multifamily side versus the condo side. Is that correct? And is there sort of a strategy there that is important to you guys?
I mean, there's definitely been much more multifamily than condo, but condo, I think everybody knows there's a tail to it, right? And there's a lot more litigation. And if we had a pick, we would pick multifamily, rental multifamily over condo, just to not have to deal with that. And as the developer is building this building, and as we're building the condo building, we're building a per plan and spec 2 code. You're getting all your inspections and approvals and COs, so it's not like you're doing anything wrong. It's just that over time, these buildings will shrink, they'll move, you'll get a drywall crack, your window seals, dry, and more air comes in, but it's maintenance to these buildings that nobody wants to do.
Right.
And
it's a long window too. It's a long window of exposure, and I mean, it's just
and then they typically will get some type of a ambulance chaser type condo attorney,
right,
to make this big list of issues, and then they're coming after you.
I think the big challenge is that you've got essentially, let's just call it 150 unit building. You've got 100 different owners in there now versus one owner as a multifamily, one operator, and usually the multifamily owner operator actually has a lot of experience in building, knows what goes on with buildings and new construction and these things, the changes that buildings go through, and even if everything is perfectly built, it doesn't mean it's a perfect building all the time going forward. But individual condo owners coming in, don't usually understand that, and it's a big, heavy education process.
And there's this expectation that because it's brand new, it's gonna be perfect, and that doesn't exist, right? Like we all have onboarded a lot of brand new buildings, and it's just an inevitability that there's gonna be some issues, even like to your point, like super common, normal, natural issues like cracks and settling or whatever it may be. So what is there on condo projects as far as or how do you approach it potentially a little bit differently with advice you may be giving your developer client during obviously like you said, you build to code, you build to spec, all of that, but do you juice some of that stuff up when it's a condo? Like what's your experience been in that space, and kind of how would you approach it a little bit differently potentially?
To be honest with you, our fee structures are typically a little bit higher, knowing we're probably going to get into litigation at some point. Our softs are typically a little bit higher, knowing that that's going to happen. We always encourage to beef up the GL insurance. We typically would do a standalone GL policy there. But then, your windows are typically beefed up, your sound, your floor to floor and your wall to wall is typically beefed up. We encourage an owner to do a structural steel building versus a wood building, because you just don't have the shrinkage with with steel, what I mean, that you do with wood. And that causes so many problems, that shrinkage between window openings, door openings, that it, becomes a bigger problem. You have different waterproofing membrane on the exterior. So you kind of definitely put a lot more belt and suspenders on there, which adds cost, but ideally you're making that up in the sale.
Yep.
But even though you do all that, the litigation is still there.
Yeah,
it really is. It's just probably a little bit less.
What's the sort of delta these days? Obviously, lumber went way up, and now it's normalized a bit, but it used to be 3-4 years ago when you were having these conversations, it was like a massive spread between going steel and concrete. And I'm talking a normal, we'll call it a typical Greater Boston 5-6 story building, right? And it would have been unheard of for anyone to do, just from a cost standpoint, to do steel and concrete. Everyone would do a podium stick, right? So what is the sort of spread these days from a dollar per foot standpoint on a 6-story building going all structural steel versus a 4/2 or a 5/1?
I would say just on the residential units, you'd probably a 15 to 20% premium.
Okay.
So I mean, if you're doing a steel podium, obviously there's no. I would take that cost out,
Right.
and then focus just on the residential units because there's other factors that go into it versus just the wood versus structural steel. And you can do low bearing light gauge, which is a little bit less than that.
Yep.
But obviously, wood is the least expensive approach. That's why you typically see the multifamily apartments wood.
Right.
You know what I mean? But some of the higher end condos that we've done that could have been wood, we've done steel or done low bearing light gauge. You know?
And have you guys explored any of this new like cross laminated timber and things like that coming down the pike here?
We've seen it. We've priced it. It's just hasn't quite gotten here yet. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of it ends up being the sub base that could do it as well. Right? There's just not a sub base that you could go out to 5 subs and say, give me a competitive price to it. And it's similar to what's happened with the low bearing light gauge. It's a really nice alternative. But if you only have 1 or 2 subs that are willing to do it, it puts you in a corner that, okay, if that sub can't do it, I can only go to this one sub. I'm putting a lot of eggs in one basket. And if there's a failure or an issue, it puts the job in a whole tailspin. You know what I mean? So, but I think that's getting better. And, there's been more projects that have been more of the low bearing light gauge. But even modular, I think modular is a great next step, right? And it's been around for a long time. But it just can't seem to get traction.
Yeah, I mean, we've done one, and that was in 2016, right?
Yeah.
So now you're talking 7 years ago, and we've really grown exponentially during that time, where we've had so many more projects that we haven't seen it again.
Yeah,
which is kind of interesting.
I think the fear is you have to bring that modular company on so early, right?
Yeah,
and you have to put a lot of money up front very early with a group that, I'm not saying that they're not stable, but it's not the norm. So you're putting, again, a lot of eggs in one basket. And then I think you're limited to, the layout of the building and some other features, you know what I mean? And they're not perfect either. Some of the boxes that have gone together, there's been some horror stories of some of the boxes not coming together the right way and having some other problems, what I mean?
It's one of those things where in theory it makes a whole lot of sense. You have a controlled building environment, all those other things, except you still have the skilled labor, the planning, the plans coming together, all these things. So, and similar with like CLT or things like that, where these things look promising in a lot of ways, and I'm personally excited to see some of these things come up, but it's so new that you're right. You just are totally limiting whether it's the sub pool or just lack of experience with it from all perspectives. That there is just by definition a little bit more risk there.
I think you're limited to unit count too. I mean, you never see like 200 units.
Right.
You might see 80 units. 60, 100 maybe, because the production, you have to have so many of them built, right? Right. That you can't get that production at some point.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember seeing some of these buildings and going up in China, these time lapses that go up in like 3 weeks. And I'm like, I don't even have any idea how that happened or if it was just a fake video, but I don't know if you've ever seen these things. And I'm like, some of this technology is wild, but it's just like.
Don't they fall over?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's actually Legos.
Right. So you kind of said, earlier, right? Part of your secret sauce is really the value you bring during pre-con, and clearly it's evident in the course of this conversation, right? You've been around a long time, very knowledgeable. Not that you're old.
Yeah, okay. I am. We had knowledge.
But what are some of like the most common mistakes that you see, particularly like younger developers making or inexperienced developers making, somewhat frequently just doesn't resonate, and you just see over and over again kind of the same thing from a mistake standpoint?
We do so much with a lot of customers, repeat customers. When someone asks us to look at something real early on, don't get me wrong, we make mistakes too, but we try to do the best of giving that developer a true estimate, like what we think it's going to take it from ground zero to being complete. So there's a lot of gaps and holes, especially when it's schematic, right, that you need to fill from past experience, maybe taking a deeper dive. Or whatever, and that when we're competing against some other GCs that don't do that, or they don't know the product type, there can be a huge swing in the numbers. At the end of the day, once you get to GMP and to your CDs, for the most part, we're using probably 90% of the same subs. And it's not like there's a magic sauce when a guy's $5 million or $10 million less at a schematic level, and like, wow, this guy really wants it. You know what I mean? It's just not there.
Right,
it's hocus pocus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the proof comes out in the pudding. And I think if you really, what's the difference? If you put the cost of the work aside, don't get me wrong, you're going to be competitive in the cost of the work with the trades, which is 80% of the work. Then it's about your general conditions, which is tied to duration and your staff. You have the right staff there, managing quality, managing safety, all that type stuff. It's your soft costs, your insurance, if you have SDI or bonding, and your fee. And obviously you should be looking at that stuff. And we probably do staff our jobs a little bit more than maybe a smaller GC, but you get what you pay for. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's not like we're putting a guy on there just because we want to put a guy on the job. He's managing the facade, or he's managing the amenity space, or whatever it might be, for better quality. So I think that the mistake is they think they're getting this big win early on, which screws up their performer once they get up into the CD level, when the numbers really start to come true. That $5 million savings doesn't ever ring true when they get up to that GMP time. You know what I mean?
Like you said, one change order would be $500,000.
They're not even getting to the change order. The number went up through that process, $5 million bucks, and now they're at a GMP that would have been about the same where we were. So I think that's where we see a lot of folks just don't get it. You know what I mean? And they think they're getting some big win, and it's just really not there. And for us, if we did that, they'd be looking at us. You know better. You know what I mean? You should have known that. You should have known that. Whatever. And would lose a business. Would lose a customer. You know what I mean? We'd rather lose the customer early on by doing the right thing than lose the customer 6 months from now once we get the CDs. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then hopefully you come back around another time and you win that customer.
I think that's oftentimes what we've seen, and I'm sure you've seen it too, is just customers come back around, they're like, oh shit, I screwed up here. I should have went with you guys in the first place. And and it ends up costing them more than it would have otherwise. So I think that's a valid point. How do you guys, speaking of that, how do you think about going in when a potential client, especially in the case of like a new client, not a repeat client, comes to you and wants to price a job? How do you guys approach it to understand you're clear on what their objective and vision for the project is, and so that you're pricing it properly and effectively?
Yeah, so we will always do a first estimate or two. It's on our dime. Really to create the relationship so they can see how we operate, how we put numbers together, all that good stuff. When it's schematic, they may be thinking one thing, we're thinking something else. We both have cabinets, right? But he may be thinking a $2,500 package, and I might be thinking $5,000. So I think once we get that preliminary estimate together, and it's very detailed. We'll show you all the holes we've filled. That's just not on the plans yet. You know what I mean? So we'll typically go through that to make sure we're on the same page. Because that's the other thing, as you go further down the process, and if we're not aligned, there's just problems that come out of that as well, right, at the end of the day. So do we agree here? Do we agree there? Whatever. We tune up that estimate. We call that like a target GMP estimate. And then we track that. So as the plans progress and, the design changes, we just, hey, listen, you do what you want to do, but that's going to be $100 more grand for the project, or $10,000 a unit, whatever the thing is, right? And they do it, don't do it, or maybe we take VE somewhere else to get something else back in line. So it's a real fluid process, but I think the most important thing is going through that early estimate and making sure it jives, because that's going to give them the test if it is the deal going to pencil at the end of the day.
Yeah. On a similar vein, I would say, how do you guys think about a realistic construction timeline, and how do you set that up and then execute it for success?
Good question. It's the same thing. When we bid something that it's very far along, it's hard to really understand the process, the logistics, all the site exposure and all that stuff. That's why the earlier on process, we typically can make sure we have the right duration in there for building demo, abatement, utility disconnect, earth support, ground improvements, all those things that need to go in. And if you're bidding a job and you've got a month to do that, it's almost impossible to figure all that stuff out, unless it's a slab on grade in a field, a building that's on virgin ground. But most of the deals nowadays, they're urban, you know what I mean, and they're in a tight location. So, yeah, I mean, we do our best to capture it all. And same thing, when we're competing against some folks that, just will say, that job took me 18 months in a similar unit count, and they don't look at the logistics side of it. And they say that's going to be 18 months, and then it's 24. You know what I mean? It's where you lose. Yeah. It's a big swing, no doubt. So it's time for all that, especially a complicated site. same thing. I can't emphasize it enough because there's a lot of things you need to do on a complicated site with local officials, all that stuff, that what they're going to allow, what they're not going to allow. So yeah, I would encourage, bringing, especially a complicated site, bringing it in early.
And how much do the various local jurisdictions impact kind of timeline? And in certain cases, can they be is it a pretty tight swing relatively, or a pretty wide swing depending on where you're building?
I would maybe in the middle.
Yeah.
Every town's different at the end of the day, and have different rules and all that type stuff. And sometimes, the order of conditions will kind of spell out what you can and can't do, and some of the work rules and all that stuff can be different. But I would say it's not like night and day. I would say there's a standard, but from that standard, there's kind of outrageous, and then there's some that this is a great town to work in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right. Interesting. And so as you're executing on the project, I think what oftentimes that we've seen, at least from our perspective being non-builders, is, you see a lot of unrealistic expectations being put on when a project's going to get completed versus the timeline from the beginning, and things shift and change. How do you try to clarify expectations throughout a project, and as a timeline might expand or shrink in some cases, and how do you kind of go about that just throughout the project?
Transparency, really. All the GMPs we do are 100% transparent. It's the same with the budget, same with the schedule. We try to inform them when there's an issue. I would say a lot of the delays nowadays, we're not perfect, and we have issues too, but a lot of them are coming with utility delays.
Yeah. Wow,
and it's
brutal.
beyond, even our delays, and the utility delays are going beyond our delays. You know what I mean? I think a lot of the delays over the past couple of years have been lack of labor. A lot of our subs aren't, they don't have the manpower to stay up on schedule, and it just becomes a snowball effect in regards to missing dates. I can't wait till we get back to a more normal time of not having so much volume in the market, because the labor, even though there's a good sub base up here, it's tapped out with labor.
Yeah, so I mean that's a whole nother sort of can of worms with the labor, question is like, how are we producing enough, kids these days that are going to go into the trades? And we're certainly not, because you can get me on my soapbox here about the waste of money that colleges are in a lot of cases, and why way more people should be going into trades and doing work that actually matters.
Yeah.
But that certainly is a big problem. And do you guys have any idea, or do you have any ideas or solutions for that to drive more labor into the markets that need it?
I think the unions do a good job with this. We do some of this as well, is trying to go to some of the VOTEC schools and trying to encourage them, get them on our job sites as like site tours, visits, maybe do some internal training. I know the iron workers and so forth, they do a lot of training with some of the VOTEC schools. I think more to create excitement in educating them, the wages you can be making if you go into this trade, you know what I mean? I think a lot of groups are trying to do more and more of that, to try to suck in some of the younger generation to more the building trades, you know what I mean? But I think that still has that stigma, if you're working in the field, you're a second-class citizen, if you will, which you're not. But I think, I think the parents all want the kids to go away to get a good education, you know what I mean? And you can still do that, right? Maybe you come out and you're in a trade for a bit, and then you run your own company.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Where are you guys able to pull most of your talent from?
Like our staff.
Yeah.
It's a little challenging, we have an office in Bridgewater, so sometimes it's tough for us to get staff that's north of Boston wanting to come south of Boston.
Yeah.
So a lot of right now, I would say Rhode Island, all of the South Shore. Some people from the north, not everybody needs to be in our office, so they'll go to the specific job sites. But I would say mainly Mass and Rhode Island and New York. It's New Jersey, Southern Connecticut, Westchester area, basically.
Yeah. Are you seeing enough kind of kids coming out of schools like, Wentworth's one that people think of a lot on the that enters the construction trade? And
we have programs with a lot of them to try to get the interns in, right?
Yeah.
We take them in for the summer, right? You try to teach them as much as we can. Ideally, you want to get them while they're a freshman. So if you get them while they're a senior, most likely they've probably already got a deal with another GC, right? So we try to get them in early on, work them all the way through for their 4 summers, and then have them come work for our company as they get to their senior year,
Nice.
What other challenges do you see in the industry right now? Obviously labor. We talked about utilities being a major roadblock, which you saw that as well. But any other sort of challenges in the construction industry, whether it's just running the business itself or sort of working on projects?
I would say lead time and materials. So it's another thing on the pre-con side. You know, we know what some of the long leads are. It's gotten much better. But at least if you're in pre-con, you can pre-purchase some of those real long lead time materials so it's not biting you in the back end when you need it. So that's still a problem. I would say 6 months ago, would have subs that wouldn't hold their prices for the duration of the job. So you're buying a drywaller. He'll give you a ballpark number of what his number would be, and it would hold it for X amount of months. And then you'd almost have to renegotiate. So you're not truly getting a GMP or a lump sum price from them. That's kind of gone away. So that's one thing that's, you know, pretty much all the subs that we're buying right now, we buy them for the duration of the project, and we lock them down. Yeah, it's getting better. It was a lot worse, basically 6 months, a year ago, in regards to managing the sub base. I think on the other thing with the subs, not just Callahan labor, the quality of the labor and the quantity of the labor of the sub base has been thin. So it ends up putting more strain on the design team, on the contractor to oversee the quality. You know, so we almost have a super in place, an assistant super managing the facade. So we're watching them put up the facade so they're not making a waterproofing mistake or whatever it might be, putting the windows in, you know, we're overseeing the rough MEPs, you know, so to make sure before something gets covered up, you know, you don't have a leak in a pipe or whatever it might be, you know what I mean? So that's been the struggle over the last few years, is really the lack of sub labor and then the quality of that sub labor. You're almost managing them yourself, you know, at the end of the day.
How can you know, or what do you guys do as the GC to ensure that, you know, the sub is bringing quality labor? I mean, you know, I guess it's just the oversight, like you just mentioned primarily, but is there anything else you can do, or is there anything you do sort of in advance to make sure the subs bring in their A game, so to speak?
Relationship. It really is. I mean, you know, you try to leverage your business partner you're jumping into bed with, whatever sub it is, right, at the end of the day, that, you know, this is an important project for Callahan, which is an important project for the customer, and try to leverage that relationship of giving you a team, you know what I mean? But there's not that many 18s out there. So
no, it's a challenge, and I will continue to beat the drum of, you know, trying to encourage more and more people to you know, instead of this, you know, dream of going to college and ended up with a, you know, $35,000 a year job, you know, sitting at a desk all day, to like really take a hard look at the trades.
With a couple $100,000 in debt.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think there's so many entrepreneurial opportunities too within the trades, you know, and within construction. Yeah, exactly. And in any aspect of it, and, you know, and everything from just continuing to do the construction, but eventually like investing in the real estate as well, in every aspect of it. So, you know, I'd always,
that's probably a good segue. Do you guys kind of get in on any of these deals with clients? And you know,
I would say mostly local developers. You know, the national developers typically, you know, they less partners the better, right, at the end of the day. And they don't need our cash. So I think on the local side, it's great because a lot of times we're creating relationship there. We're kind of helping them getting over their equity hurdle. And, you know, I think it does align the contractor and the developer, you know, have the same alignment in regards to the success of the project. You know, some developers, you know, they don't want any partners. It is what it is, you know. So we do that. A lot of it is at the time of closing or GMP. But we've got some that we've actually put some money in at risk through the permitting and approval process. And we kind of just go pari passu with that developer. You know, he gets his developer's fee, we get our contractor's fee. He takes his expertise, and we kind of ride his coattails through the development side. And he kind of rides through our coattails on the construction side. And we manage it together. You know what I mean? It's a good way of managing risk, to be honest with you. That, and talk about transparency. I mean, all the deals we do is transparent, but it's even a little bit more transparent here, where, you know, I see everything he's doing, he sees everything we're doing. It's a true partnership. They have the common goal, right? But it's a good way to go, too. You know what I mean? And again, I think it creates some value in some different ways as well. You know?
Yeah. So you mentioned, I think, at least if I heard you correctly, sometimes you're putting up equity early, and then other times you're sort of contributing your fee. You
know what? We've done that before, but for 95% of the time we're contributing equity. You know?
Okay.
We, you know, every now and then there's a scenario where we'll discount a fee and it goes in as equity, but for the most part it's writing a check.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Nice. And what is it that you think you look for when you're on those deals that you're actually participating as a partner, contributing equity? Is there anything specific you look for? Is it certain industries or areas or developers or?
I mean, ideally, we like to go in the same as the developers in at, you know what I mean? The same returns and so forth. They're not all like that.
Yeah, you want to be part of the sponsor.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, we're trying to get the developer to the GMP too. The reason why we're doing it is we're kind of working together to get to the GMP, so we're giving up or whatever it might be. So that's the ideal situation. They're not all like that. Some of them we just treat as like a limited partner, you know, at the end of the day. But yeah, different ones for different deals. You know what I mean? You know, 100 times a return, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, they're all like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I wish. Are there any projects that are especially special for you or memorable for you that you worked on that you were really interesting that we can dive into a little bit?
I would say the ones that stand out is we just finished one for Redgate called 500 Ocean.
Yeah.
It was 300 units. I think they did really well on the exit. It was their flagship at the time, you know, high-end units, high-end amenity. There was restaurants tied into the building. I think it was 2-level steel podium, 5-stick. And the other part of it is, you know, Redgate is great to work with. Great partner. We've done, I think, 7 or 8, 9 deals with them now.
Nice.
So when you have that, and again, when you're rowing in the same direction and it's transparent and you know your partners know they're not going to screw each other, it's an easy process. It's you know, you see all these horror stories that people fighting, the GC fight and the developer fighting, but they've been great to work with. Yeah, exactly.
We have.
So that's a good one that we're proud of. I would say we did the montage at Assembly Row for Federal Realty. Other good guys, great guys to work with. 20-story tower. It was like 450 units, I think, 700 and something thousand square feet. Precast garage, and it's tied into a retail wood podium, you know, wood frame above a podium. So a bunch of different construction types there, kind of complicated things. But I like it. I mean, you don't see too many open shop GCs doing high rise. You know what I mean? So, and we see that coming out. You know, maybe this next cycle coming more out to the burbs. So that was a good project. We just we did a hotel for Claremont, which was a 10-story hotel in Brookline, right on Brookline Ave. All glass building. A nice deal with them. And Claremont's great to work with. And then on the life science side, we just finished up the core and shell of Rev Labs with the Great Land guys. The 2 Boston property guys that we knew from BP and
good friends.
Well, shout out to you, Dorman. You better be listening.
They're both great guys. And we kind of took that from start to finish. So we did the pre-con, we did the core and shell, and we're wrapping up all the lab TIs there now. So
that's cool.
Yeah, it was a nice deal.
Awesome. And what are you sort of jazzed about moving forward here with Callahan?
I like where we're positioned. You know, I don't like a downturn, but I like where we're positioned. You know, we're strong financially. You know, I'm extremely confident we'll get through the downturn. You know, we're geographically diverse, so we have an office in New York now that, you know, in the next upswing, we see that growing quite a bit. And eventually I'd like to see that balance between that office and this office doing about the same volume. Yeah. I like that we're diversified, so, you know, we can move and shake out a different product type, you know, and be diverse. If, you know, life science comes back strong, we can slide there. If senior housing comes back strong, we can slide over there where other things might drop off. I mean, similar to the hospitality market, you know, when COVID hit, there was none.
Right.
You know, and a lot of GCs were just doing hospitality. You know, they got chewed up a little bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then we have a huge, you know, customer base. You know, most of our work is repeat business, and so much of this business is relationship. You know, who you know and how you service that customer, being a friend to them, the transparency, being a good business partner. And I think anytime you have that, you know, it's just easier to do business. You know what I mean? It's not, you know, you don't have to be the low guy to do the deal. There's a level of trust there, relationship there that guy that you have a friendship with, they know you're not gonna screw them. Right. At the end of the day, they feel comfortable that you're always going to be working out in their best interest. So I think, you know, I feel we're positioned really well.
Nice. Cool. And do you guys, I mean, you talk about sort of the New York office, growing the New York office, and or whether it's up here, do you guys have like a business development function or something that you're doing to generate new business?
Yeah, we've got a BD person down there. You know, it's small. We just started about 3 years ago. So first thing was to grow the sub base. That's intact now. We're doing actually a $118 million job for Rose down there
Nice,
now.
awesome.
Doing a job for LCB, which is a group that does senior up here that's doing some stuff down there. And we've got 2 jobs in pre-con down there. Just awarded one for August Housing Authority.
Nice, congrats.
So just starting to get going. So cool.
That's great. And how do you, as you're growing your business, how you growing the sort of project pipeline? How do you manage that from a backlog perspective? How do you think about sort of making sure you're winning deals and growing, but not getting over capacity?
I mean, that's the good part of doing pre-con. You get so much time to plan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you're bidding something, you're going to start the next month. There's no planning there, and then you don't have the right teams to do the work. So, I mean, that's the other huge part of getting in early and providing pre-con services. You can put the right teams together and put them, teeing the project up for success, But it is hard. I mean, we're constantly rotating people, as we're finishing a job, we're replacing them onto another job. And it was challenging there, in the last year or so, because we were definitely pushing our limits in regards to volume.
Yeah.
But it's more in check now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think every GC, if you weren't busy in the last 2 years, good luck to these businesses.
That's great. And just as your backlog builds, as you get to kind of capacity, do you start to look at pricing jobs differently too? Because you're like, we maybe don't need it as much or whatever. Is that a factor in your growth?
There's no doubt if we start to get busy, we're capping out. We politely, we don't say no to a lot of people because you never know when that customer is coming back around again, right? So sometimes we'd politely say no, that we just can't do it. Or you can, obviously put a higher fee in there, a higher cost in there, so you're really not in line for it. But, again, so much of our customers, it's relationship. And we'll be straight up with them. If there's a few deals ready to break or going to break 6 months out or 8 months out, I'd say to them, listen, we're struggling for staff right now.
Yeah.
I have a super, but I don't have a PM. We're out searching, but that's the problem, know? So we're straight up with them, with our customers, and it's really not a problem now. I think, I think everybody is kind of getting to a point, there are going to be some layoffs in 23, you know what I mean? Just, there's plenty of volume right now, but as you're starting to burn through jobs and they're starting to close, and if you don't have a place to put that staff, you kind of move and shake a little bit,
Yeah. And how do you? I'm curious from a business perspective. How do you kind of manage that as the jobs kind of grow and shrink and the timing doesn't quite work out in terms of like sort of managing the human side, the people side of that, with whether it's layoffs required when maybe you want that person back in the future too. I don't know if that's the case often, but is that possible?
And that's when it goes the other way. That maybe you take a job at a discount. You know what I mean? You mean lower fee, whatever, to try to get the job to make sure you're keeping that staff on, so you don't lose them. So it goes both ways a lot of times like that. You try not to do it because some of those can come back and bite you. You know what I mean? But it's better than losing a key player that you're going to need down the road. You know what I mean? So I would suspect you're going to start seeing that with subs and with GCs in general. 23 is going to be thin. I think everybody knows that, and you're going to have, staff you need to carry, which we do sometimes, try to put, 2 supers on a job to make it run that much better. Obviously you're losing money on it, but and same thing, that's transparent with the customer as well. So he doesn't think we're overloading the job. Yeah. But you try to keep all your good guys.
Look, there's a lot of challenges running any type of business, but I can only imagine running a construction business and the moving parts around that with all the everything's a one-off project essentially. So there's not necessarily ongoing recurring revenues like a software company or something that makes it a lot easier to plan around, right?
Right.
So
hopefully you do one job with the customer, then you roll right into the next one, you roll into the next one. But
totally. So I'm kind of curious, is there anything that you think that maybe you guys do or other GCs, we talked maybe a little bit about the pre-con side of things, but in terms of the construction itself, is there anything that you guys look at or really take care to making sure the way a project is done that maybe some of your competitors don't look at it in the same way?
I think, I think there's a good GC base up here. I think a lot of people know how to execute. I think one thing that we probably do better at is the civil side of things. We know, I think everybody knows, site is the biggest unknown and the biggest risk on any job. And if you can manage that risk better than your competition, sometimes have some type of an advantage, you know what I mean? So we do have the capacity to self-perform site work. We don't do it on all of our jobs, but we have our own eye, and a lot of times we can step in, do the site work there. And if you do bump into an obstacle, an unknown, we treat it like a regular GMP. We're working to save money on both sides. We don't want it to be an exposure to the owner as well as an exposure to us. So if you had a sub in that scenario, you have a little less control. You know what I mean? Where that sub, he's trying to probably, make as much money as he can on that change, right? And it's a little bit tougher to manage. But whether we self-perform the site or don't self-perform the site, we have in-house civil engineers that will tee that job up, I think, better than a lot of our competition on the civil risk, on the site risk. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I know a lot of our competition doesn't have that capability. So there's, I think from our perspective, less change orders on the site side of our jobs, and I think on the building side as well.
Right.
But I think that would be one thing that's different than our competition. Then once if it is a job that where we would self-perform the site, you even have that much more coverage in managing the risk. You know what I mean? On unknowns. You know what I mean?
I guess sort of coming to near the end of the conversation here, is there anything, is there anything that we didn't ask you that we should have asked you?
I think you did it.
Is that what's
Get me out of here. No, sorry. Well, to wrap up then, what's now that we're up in Boston, you live down the Cape, right? It's so awesome. We have a similarity in loving Falmouth, I think. So, but what do you now that you're up here in Boston today? What do you like? What do you like to do in Boston while you're here?
I'm going to have a few beers with my friends.
Here we go. All right, nice. I know it's PT, and I did not get the invite. So I'm kidding. No, but Pat, it was
beers and kids hockey. I mean,
exactly.
Right in my wheelhouse.
No, Pat, it was really a fantastic conversation. Appreciate it. Very insightful. And obviously, you guys have a fantastic reputation in the market, and we're hopefully can find a lot of ways to work together going forward as well in the future. But thanks for being here with us.
Thanks a lot for coming in, Pat.
Awesome.
Thanks.
And stay tuned for the next episode of Empowered Returns.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Empowered Returns. If you're a forward-thinking real estate investor or developer looking for actionable advice that will help you generate market-beating returns, make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast fix. I'm Mike DeMello with Charles Gate, and I'd love to connect on LinkedIn and further the conversation for any specific questions you may have. Thank you for listening.